Hi everybody and welcome back to a new episode of Diagnosedan. Today we are working on a 2003 Audi A4 and the customer complaint is the ABS light is on. The car has been to another shop, they cleared the codes, the ABS light went out, but after a while it came back on. It has also been to a Audi dealership and they told them it needed a new ABS control unit. Now since the new ABS control unit is really expensive from Audi, they asked me for a second opinion. So let's see if we can find out what the problem is with this vehicle, and with your help I don't think it's going to be a problem, so let's diagnose this together. This is the car we're working on. It's an S4, so this one has got the big V8 and this one has got all-wheel drive. Now in the next step we're going to confirm the customer complaint and we're going to scan for codes. Now a lot of car owners think that this Scantool is going to tell me exactly what part I need to change on this car. Now this is not true. Scanning the car for codes is only the first step in a diagnostic process and it will tell you what to check next. Another myth is that an aftermarket scan tool will give you different codes than a factory scan tool. This is also not true. It's the car giving you the codes and the scanner is only a way of communicating with the car. So the scan tool is not making the codes up, it's the car giving the scan tool the codes. Let's confirm the complaint. Let's turn the ignition on and ABS light comes on and goes out again. So the customer already told me the fault was intermittent, so let's hook up a Scantool and see if there are any fault codes stored in the ABS unit. Let's select ABS and let's read the DTCs. Now if there are any fault codes stored in this ABS unit, it's gonna be history codes, because if the code was present right now, that light would not go out, right? Now if there are history codes stored in the ABS unit, at least we know what caused the light to come on when the customer was experiencing the complaint. And we've got a fault code stored, and it's the 01435 brake pressure sensor 1 voltage supply. Now just imagine for a minute we're one of the people believing that this scan tool is telling us exactly what to change on that car. In that case, we just need to find that pressure sensor, swap it out for a new one, and the car is fixed, right? Well, it might turn out that this car indeed needs a pressure sensor. But what if we change it out and the car isn't fixed? Is the customer going to tell you, well, that can happen, here's your money and try again? No, that's not the way it works. I mean, it's called diagnostics. You can't just drive by a shop, let them pull codes and tell you what's wrong with your car. It doesn't work that way. You don't go to your doctor and say, hey doc, I feel like I'm gonna faint. He's not gonna tell you, well, I had a guy in here yesterday with exactly the same symptoms. He had high blood pressure. Just take some pills and you're fine. It doesn't work that way. He needs to measure your blood pressure, take a look at your heart, find out what's wrong. It's like detective work. And it's the same with cars. On this ABS unit, the pressure sensor is mounted on the outside of the hydraulic unit. On a lot of newer cars, the pressure sensor is built into the hydraulic unit itself and it's non-serviceable. Now this one can be replaced. It's a 3-wire sensor, and what this sensor does is watch the hydraulic pressure within the ABS system. For instance, when you push the brake pedal, and the computer can see this because it's watching the brake pedal switch, it's expecting the hydraulic pressure to rise, right? Now, if you're braking, but the pressure isn't rising, there must be a leak or something must be wrong with the system, and it will flag a fault code. So actually, this is a very important sensor. The computer flagged the code for this pressure sensor, so we need to check it out. Just like the doctor who's taking your blood pressure, we need to take a closer look to our patient. Now it looks like our patient is doing just fine right now. The symptoms are gone, the light is out, so I'm not expecting to find anything wrong with it right now. Since it's the only lead we've got to check it out. Now, in order to do some measurements, we need to know what to expect on each of those 3 wires. So let's take a look at a wiring diagram. So let's take a look at our Audi wiring diagram. This module over here is our ABS control module. And this B107 over here is going to be our hydraulic pressure sensor. Now, as you can see, this is a 3-wire sensor. We've got a red and white wire, a yellow and green wire, and a yellow and black wire. Now, how do we know what to expect on each of those wires? That's very simple. Just go and stand on the component and click on the little multimeter. Now, I'm sorry this is in Dutch, but I've got the Dutch version. Over here we can see if we measure from pin 25 to battery negative with the ignition on, we're supposed to measure 0 volts. This means that pin 25, the yellow and black wire, is going to be our ground wire. If we measure from pin 42 to battery negative with the ignition on, we're supposed to measure 5 volts. This means pin 42, or our red and white wire, is going to be our power feed. If we measure from pin 26 to battery negative and we're not pressing the pedal, we're supposed to see something about 0.4 of a volt, and when we do press the pedal, we're supposed to see something from 0.4 volts to 2.5 volts. This means that pin 26, or our yellow and green wire, is going to be our signal wire. In order to do some measurements, we need to create some space. Now, in order to do that, we need to get this coolant reservoir out of the way. Now, I already got the screw out because I showed you the sensor just a minute ago. But what I want to show you guys is that I use these elastic bands with hooks on them to get components out of the way. Now, these are really cheap. I found like 5 and they come in different sizes for €2. Now, the great thing about these is when you're hanging calipers, for instance, and you've got one of those metal S-hooks, you're quite limited to where to hook them to because the S-hooks aren't stretchable. These are stretchable, so it's always easy to find a spot to hook them to. And since they're elastic, they're quite forgiving on the material. So when you lean on it, it won't immediately break. In the wiring diagram, we've seen the red and white wire is the power feed, and in this case it's 5 volts. The yellow and green is the signal wire, and the yellow and black is our ground. Now, you can measure this with a normal multimeter, and I'm using my scope as a normal multimeter. These are slow signals, so you don't really need a scope. Let's set it up as a multimeter, and we're expecting to see 5 volts, so I will set it to a 10 volt range. Now let's back probe the red and white wire, which is supposed to be the power feed, and turn on the ignition. And as you can see, 5 volts, so that's fine. Now let's measure the signal wire and let's scale it down to 5 volts. And the signal should change as I press the brake pedal because the hydraulic pressure inside the hydraulic unit will change. So let's press the brake pedal. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that signal changed. Now, the last thing we need to check is the ground. Now, you might be thinking, is it really necessary to check that ground? We saw the signal change, so obviously the sensor is working, so we've got a ground. Well, you are right. We've got a ground, but we don't know if that ground is any good. If we've got a poor ground connection, this could have an influence on the level of our signal voltage. So yes, it's very important to check that ground. Now, the best way to test the ground is using a test light. If the ground is good enough to light a test light, it's certainly good enough for our sensor. So let's back probe the ground wire Let's hook our test light up to battery positive. And when I touch the ground, our test light should light up. So let's check our ground wire. And it lights up, so our ground wire is perfect. Now, since we are using the test light, let's also use the test light to test the power feed to the sensor. Now, since the power feed is only 5 volt, I'm expecting the test light to light up very dim. So let's back probe the power wire. Let's hook it up to battery negative. Whoops. And let's see if our test light lights up. Let's turn on the ignition. And I don't know if you guys can see that because it's quite dim, but the test light does light up. So far, we've only been measuring on the sensor itself. We don't actually know if the signal makes it into the computer. Now, an easy way to check that is select the data pit of that pressure sensor on our Scantool and see if the value changes as we press the brake pedal. Now let's select that brake pressure data pit. Let's see. Here it is, brake pressure. Let's select it and let's turn it into a graph so it's easier for you guys to see. Now what I'm gonna do is sit inside the car and press the brake pedal. And remember, this is processed data. So if the signal is making it into the computer, you will see this graph change. So I'm going to sit inside the car right now and pressing the brake pedal and releasing and pressing again and releasing. We've checked the power, we've checked the ground, we've checked the signal wire, and we even saw the signal made it all the way into the computer looking at the brake pressure data pit on our Scantool. Now, we already invested a lot of time in this car. All the tests are fine, the car is not acting up, and basically we're getting nowhere. So let's send this customer on its way and let him come back when the car is acting up. Now, the downside of thinking like this is the customer is probably not willing to pay for an answer like, I don't know what's wrong with your car. So all the time we've invested this far is wasted. Now, this is a problem with intermittent faults. Shops are losing money. That's why nobody likes them. Now, but why would a problem be intermittent? Why would something be fine right now and act up 10 minutes later or an hour later? Something must have changed. Now, these cars are exposed to the elements. They're exposed to heat, cold, vibration, water. Now, to some extent, we can recreate these circumstances. We can do a tap test. We can wiggle wires. We can heat things up, cool them down. Now, to make a long story short, and not to turn this into an hour-long video, I want to show you what I found using a heat gun and a product called Freezer. It's a shock froster which can cool things down very fast. It's giveaway time. In the next step, we're picking a random comment from my last video. If your name shows up in the screen, please contact me. My email address is in the description box of this video. And we'll make sure this fantastic AutoSim Pro sensor simulator is coming your way. We're also doing a new giveaway. We're giving away this fantastic battery tester. All you have to do is follow a link in the description box of this video, answer a question, and you're in on the giveaway. Off camera, I did a lot of testing. I've tapped modules, I've tapped the sensor, I heat things up, I wiggled wires, cooled them down, just until I found a problem. Right now, the test light is connected to battery positive. The other side of the test light is connected to the ground wire of our pressure sensor. Now, as long there is a ground on its pressure sensor, the light is lighting up. Now, you guys watch that test light as I heat up and cool down the ABS unit. Now, to make sure it's not a coincidence, I heat it up and cool it down a couple of times. In this test, I'm using a product called Freezer. Now, you don't need this. You can also use shop air, but that would be very noisy on camera. So you guys watch the test light. As you could see, when we heated up the ABS control unit, we lost the ground to our sensor. Now, when we lose the ground to that sensor stops working. And when the sensor stops working, the computer is going to flag a code for it. Now, as we can see in the wiring diagram, that sensor ground is coming directly from the ABS control module. I'm suspecting there is a bad solder joint on the circuit board of that module, and keep in mind that things expand and retract when they're heated up and cooled down again. So when you have a broken wire, a bad connection, or a bad solder joint, you might have continuity one time, but lose continuity the other time depending on the temperature. Now, that ABS module is placed right beside that big V8. So when you're driving around with the hood closed, it could get really hot under the hood. And that's why this problem was intermittent. This car was diagnosed by the dealership with having a bad ABS control unit. Now, I agree we're losing the sensor ground because of a bad ABS control unit. Now there are 3 ways we can fix this car. Number 1, we can replace the ABS unit with a brand new one from Audi. That's gonna cost about 1,500 euros. Option number 2, we can get this unit fixed. We can get it remanned for a couple of hundred. Option number 3, we can solder in an external ground to our sensor. That's gonna cost us about 50 minutes. Now for now, we're gonna solder in the wire, and afterwards I will talk to the customer and see what he wants. Now I can kind of guess which option he's gonna choose. So I'm quite curious, what would you choose? So please leave a comment in the comment box of this video. What will you do? Option 1, 2, or 3? So we soldered in a new ground wire and attached it to the valve block itself, which is never going to lose its ground. So this is a good ground. I'm very curious, if this was your car, would you go for option 1, which is 1,500 euros, option 2, a couple of hundred euros, or would you say, well, this only took you 15 minutes, it's a good repair, leave it like this? I'm very curious because technically there's nothing wrong with this ground. It's a solid ground. It might just not look as pretty. So leave a comment in the description box. I talked to the customer and I gave him the 3 options: replacing the unit with a new one, getting this one repaired, or leaving the repair as it is. Now, to no surprise, the customer chose the last option. I mean, this is an older car and that repair is gonna last the rest of the car's lifetime. Now, I hope you learned something about intermittent problems. They can be a little bit tricky and they need some detective work. Now, if you want to learn more, please subscribe to my channel. When you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I post a new video. And remember, Diagnosedan, fixed it again. See you next time, guys. Somehow I had the feeling this video wasn't finished, so this is a little bit of bonus footage. If you've been watching closely, you saw we had a fault code for losing a power supply. Now in the end, it turned out we had a ground problem. You might wonder why. Now this is because of circuit design. Some circuits can't tell the difference between losing a power or a ground, especially on older cars. So if you have a power supply problem, make sure you both check the powers and the grounds. Now I told you guys I fixed the car, but I never proved it to you. So we're gonna do one more cool test. We're gonna take a look at our test light again, and as long as our test light is lit, we've got a good ground. I'm gonna heat up the module until the point we're losing our ground. At the same time, we're gonna take a look at our pressure data pit on the Scantool. Now when we're losing our ground, I'm gonna attach that soldered in ground wire to the exact same spot we're gonna fix it permanently. Now if our values return to the same values we had before the ground dropped out, we know we fixed the car. And if your name shows up on the screen, please contact me. My email address is in the description.